Hey everyone, this is Zephyr, and welcome to the BaileyWiki channel, where we teach everyday DMs how to create truly amazing experiences for their players by combining art and technology. We also create modular systems and scenes that you can use without any setup, and some of our maps for Foundry Virtual Tabletop are going to be the backdrop for today's installment of Automating Foundry, this time on NPC Chatter. In one of the mastery coaching sessions that I run for some of our patrons, the topic of creating some kind of ambient discussion or chatter from NPCs based upon player movement and proximity was brought up. And from that, I came up with this method for having this random dialogue using the patrol module from Ripper and, of course, Monk's active tau triggers. So this episode is all about combining those two modules to create really cool and immersive experiences for your players with this kind of randomized NPC chit-chat and chatter as they go about your scenes. It's particularly effective in areas where there's lots of crowds or things like markets. But there's a lot of areas where these ideas can really come to life and add a lot to your scenes and your world. So with that, let's go ahead and dive into this episode of Automating Foundry. Our classroom for today is going to be our Dwarven Halls and Blacksmith from the February release. And before we get started, I also want to point out a pretty important setting here that we're going to be leveraging today. If you go into your configure settings and we're up in the all section, or the core area, either one, and you will find there is the pan to token speaker setting, and we want to make sure that that is ticked off. Now, this is a client-side setting, so your players will also need to have this. I am using also Monk's player settings, so I can use this sync setting to send that over to all of my players, and then it's not going to pan over to them as we are talking. Before we fully dive in here, there's a few things to note about the modules we're going to be using. We are, of course, going to be using Monk's active tau triggers, and as per usual, we will also be taking advantage of the tagger module. We'll also be going over an optional use case with the patrol module from Ripper. All three of these modules are completely free, so you can use those with any kind of setup. In terms of materials, we of course are going to need tokens if we're going to have tokens actually chattering to each other and our players. So you'll need artwork or whatever representation you're using for your tokens there, and you'll also want to have some kind of representation for your tiles. Now to get started, we have a blacksmith here and we have Ventress. Like we mentioned earlier, Ventress is our trusty helper token. For our blacksmith, if you need a blacksmith token, then if you go into the mass edit presets and you are a subscriber to the BaileyWiki premium content, then in our furnishings and special compendium, we also have a folder of NPC tokens, and you can see there are a variety of guards, merchants that are right now blacksmiths, and then we also have sailors and indigenous folk as well. We are slowly expanding on the NPC token library, so check that out if you need any in a pinch for your games. Now, when it comes to creating our active tile, you can of course use the tile browser or the place tile to bring in your active tile. We also have another handy mass edit preset for this as well though. So if we go into the nuts and bolts prefabs, we have a folder for Monk's active tile triggers. If you use spawn active tile, you get a nice pop-up here where you can specify the image, and this automatically starts inside of our Maps Premium Towns module and the Active Tiles folder, and we have a lot of these really nice, really clean, icon-esque active tile images. Many of these are also included in our free Maps module. The library isn't quite as extensive, but it's also there, so you can use that as well. I'm going to go ahead and choose this info option. The image isn't really important here, it's just something that helps us keep track of what we're doing. Then I'm going to place my tile. Now for today on the triggers, we don't need to do anything particularly special here. This first example that we're going to go through is the most basic, and it's basically just going to be whenever someone steps here, we're going to make the blacksmith talk. So for actions, our primary action today is going to be the chat message action. And for chat message here, we're looking for idle NPC chatter, and so we're not going to be sending this to the actual chat section. Instead, we're just going to be doing the bubbles when tokens talk. And if you're not doing the chat message, then the flavor doesn't matter and the in character doesn't matter either. So I'm going to keep it nice and simple with my text here and just say hello. And for speaker, you can of course manually select these, but we like to use tagger here. This also allows us to have multiple NPCs working on things here as well. So I'm going to go ahead and put in blacksmith 1 for my tag and save. Now it's important to note with the chat message action that if you use tagger and it does not find anything with the appropriate tags, it's going to default to the triggering token. So you really want to make sure that you actually have something tagged on your scene for this. So you might want to test before you have an actual game. Then of course for the chat bubble, we're going to change that to just token bubble only. And then right now we're going to leave this 4 to everyone. We update the tile, and of course we're going to also need to make sure that we have our token tagged. If we double right click, we can then add this tag in. Now if we have Ventress go over here and step on the tile, we have the blacksmith say hello. And same thing if the blacksmith steps on it. It doesn't matter where the blacksmith goes. If Ventress steps on the tile, the blacksmith will say hello. So we have a really basic tile setup here. That's not anything crazy revolutionary here, but we can now start to get a little bit more interesting and complex with this. For our first layer of complexity here, we're going to make this chat message a whole lot more interesting. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to add in a roll table action here. So for the roll table, I've already gone ahead and prepared a few different ones for us here. So if I go into my little NPC Chatter folder that I've created, I have a few different roll tables, and I'm just going to select the roll table that I would like. And so we'll call this the approach one. And we just have a public role. I'm going to remove this add chat message. We don't need to be spamming the chat with the results here. And we'll hit update. And then we'll make sure that our chat message is up at the top. In the chat message, instead of being hello, we're going to have triple open curly brackets, and we're going to have value dot text dot and then square brackets for 0, close the brackets, and then triple curly brackets again. And so this value dot text is an array of values here, and that is going to be taken from our roll table. And if we open up the roll table, we can see here that all of these results are going to be text. So when we roll on this roll table, it's going to generate us a value that is a text value, as that's the result type here, and then it's going to give us the actual content here is what the first entry in that array of text values is. So when we're going to roll on that, we're going to get that text value filled out, and then our chat message using our handlebar helpers is going to actually display that result. So if we update the tile now, and we step on it, we'll see that now we're going through a few different random options. Okay, so that's increased the complexity a little bit, but this is still a very simple tile. Some additional refinements we probably want to make here are on our setup, instead of being the restricted tokens for allow all tokens, we want to probably change this to allow only player tokens, as this particular set is using our approach type of chatter here. So our random list is all things for when someone walks up to the blacksmith. So the blacksmith himself isn't going to just randomly start saying these things, so we can remove the blacksmith and our other NPCs from this setup. Alternatively, you could leave this on all, and you could add a filter to remove the blacksmith tag here and make sure that that token doesn't actually cause the appropriate chatter to happen. But if we have only player tokens here, then now Ventress should trigger this, but the blacksmith themselves will not. And as a reminder, player tokens are defined by their ownership. So if you go to a token like we have Ventress here and we go to configure ownership, all players are set as owner. This also applies if the default here is none, but a single player is defined as an owner. Ventress is still a player token then. So it's as long as a player has an ownership of owner on the token, then it is defined as a player token. Without that, it is then a GM token. So our next step of adding some complexity and actually making this feel alive is adding this kind of idle component. This idea that makes it seem like the blacksmith is still doing things even when we're not there. And the first layer of this is going to be adding a larger tile that when our player moves around, it will cause the NPC to have some idle chatter. We're going to put this in an area where the person might be walking around and within sight of the blacksmith, but not necessarily within the range that it would be assumed that the blacksmith would immediately be like, oh, hey, what's going on? So we're going to create a tile for this. So if we go into our tile browser, just to show you the alternative method here, we can drop in whatever tile we'd like. This is going to be a larger one, so I'll use a slightly larger image here. And then I'm going to resize this just a bit. And for this tile, the main change we're going to do is instead of enter, we're going to make this a movement. And then we're also going to add a cooldown here or a % chance to trigger. It's kind of up to you which one you prefer. You can also do a combination of both. So if you want this to be, say, a 75% chance, then we can do so. And then we can also add, say, a 1 second cooldown, just so that if we're moving quickly, we're not going to somehow stumble into having them talk a lot. Then we'll also change this to only player tokens. And then for actions, we can open up our previous tile and we can very easily just drag over our role table. Although first we do need to have an action over here. We can drag over our role table and chat message and reorder those properly. And the only change we need to make now is opening up our role tables and changing to the appropriate one. Instead of approach, we have this idle. I have two different ones for sales or work. Go ahead and use work. If we open this up, you'll see that the work is just kind of random things that the blacksmith might be saying to themselves as they are going about their day, whereas sales is more for like a market trying to hawk wares, etc. So here we have that and our movement, and then we'll go ahead and update the tile. For our original tile, we can also increase its size a little bit as well. Maybe we want this whole zone to work for that. And then now if we start moving Ventress around, we'll see that we have this nice idle chatter. Next, we're really going to start making things come alive by utilizing the patrol module from Ripper. So of course, this setup that we have now is perfectly serviceable to have this nice area where our players will move around and that will create the idle chatter. And then as they approach, then we have kind of more of a how are you and what can I do for you in the shop once we get closer. But if we wanted to really make this feel alive, we would also want our blacksmith to move around, and that is where patrol comes in. So for right now, I'm going to move our active tiles out of the way, and we'll come back to them in just a moment. And we're going to go ahead and create a patrol area. So to start with that, you're going to use either a polygon or a rectangle here, and we'll just draw out this drawing. And you need to just have the word patrol in your text. And now if we go ahead and double right click on our token here, we can enable random patrol here. And this is going to have our token randomly move around within this drawing that's been labeled patrol. You may need to unpause it and enable the toggle patrol in order for the token to move about. There's a lot of different settings you can do here to further customize the patrolling aspect. And there's also things like having path patrols, etc. But for right now, we're going to focus on this random patrol within a square or a polygon. If you want to adjust the patrol settings in general, the patrol module has its own list of settings, and you can use that to tweak how much delay there is between making these different movements and also the speed, etc. here. and also if you want there to be diagonal movement or not, and smooth movement or not. That smooth movement is how our token is kind of just panning around throughout the rectangle here. Once the token has been selected, you'll notice that they stop moving until you deselect them, so that's also a way you can interact there. But why are we setting this up here where we have this patrol bit? Well, as we experienced earlier, whenever our player moved around in our tile, we were triggering some conversation and idle chatter from our blacksmith there. So we can apply that same logic here and have the blacksmith trigger his own idle movement and idle chatter as we go. So here I'm going to go ahead and take our original tile, and we're going to resize this now. And we'll go ahead and just place it down here. And instead of it being only player tokens, we're going to switch this now to only GM tokens. And instead of movement, we're going to have enter. And so now as our token moves around, you should intermittently step on this active tile we have in the middle, and then give us our dialog option here. Now, if you want this to be a little bit more frequent before we have this at only a 75% chance to trigger, we're kind of doing the whole intermittent triggering here by virtue of it just taking up one space out of the 9 tiles or grid spaces that our token could interact with. So we can instead increase the chance to trigger, but also introduce a slightly higher cooldown here. So maybe it's every 3 seconds or every 2 seconds rather than 1. So it's a little less spammy, but it can still trigger fairly frequently. So of course you can adjust this further, and then we can still use the idea of this kind of customer interaction tile. One thing to note is if you're going to have them overlap, that the smaller tile can be hard to select if it's underneath the larger tile. So with your smaller tile, whichever it happens to be, I would hit the bring to front, and now we'll see that as long as you're hovering over the bounding box of that smaller tile, you can click it whether it is in the area that is covered by your larger tile or not. So you can use this to increase your area for customer interaction. And of course, if you are using this with your players, then for all of these setups, you probably want to hide your tiles and also hide your drawing. So now we can see that when Ventress enters into kind of sales area, it's going to ask us kind of the sales pitch or greeting here from the shopkeeper, and otherwise the shopkeeper is just going to move around and occasionally trigger his idle dialogue, giving us a nice living feel to this particular area. The last component that we're going to discuss is taking this kind of greeting zone that we've established here and making it actually move with our shopkeep. This might not necessarily make the most sense for a shopkeeper per se, but it makes a lot of sense for things like guards or other NPCs that have interactions as players move close to them. So to do that, we are going to first go ahead and pause things so that our shopkeep isn't bouncing around everywhere and it'll be a little easier to work with. Then we're going to take our greeting tile here and we're going to make it a little bit smaller, say 3 by 3 here. And importantly, this is going to be moving around with our patrolling shopkeep. So in our triggers, we probably want to change this to not just enter, but also movement, and then just add a bit of a cooldown to this. This helps it so that if we are moving around with this tile here, that we have a higher chance of actually triggering the interaction if we're close. Because as this bounces around, the tile moving to our character isn't going to trigger it. So hopefully then if we move around while we're close to the shopkeep here, we'll still get that interaction. So that we have that. We're going to go ahead and move our shopkeep into the middle here. I've got auto rotate going, so he's been rotating as he moves around. So I want to make sure that he's at 0 rotation here when I go to do this. Then I'm going to use mass edit to attach this tile. So first I'll hit Shift Q, it's the default keybind to bring up the linker. Then I'll hit L to begin smart linking, and it's going to automatically link together the tokens that I have selected. So here I have just my blacksmith. Then when I switch to my tile tool, I'll go ahead and link with the attach selected to link. And now we have the tile and our token together. So now if I move the tile, the token moves with it. And similarly, the token will move with the tile. It's also applying that rotation as he moves around as well. So that's all we need to do for the linking aspect. To make things a little bit easier to see, I'm going to go ahead and color code a little bit here. And now I will go ahead and have my blacksmith back inside of his patrol box. We have enable random patrol on. And if we unpause and deselect him, then he should resume his regular patrols once again. And we can see that the tile is moving around with him. You'll notice that the tile kind of goes to the new position for the token before the token gets there, and that's going to do with the smooth movement setting that we have set up in Patrol. So our token for our blacksmith is bouncing around his patrol area as expected before, and he's still activating his idle chatter tile every now and then. And then if we move Ventress around, we'll see that we have the different greeting actions now based on proximity. So it's not just when we move up to him, it's actually when we're moving around near the blacksmith. Now again, for a shopkeep, this might not make the most sense unless the shopkeep has a pretty far wandering range from their market stall or something like that. But for guards and things, this is a great application if you want them to have some kind of banter with the citizenry as they go about. So let's go ahead and take a look at that demo scene that we showed at the very beginning of this video and take a look at how we put these things together. So here we are in our blacksmith market in the city scene, and you can see now from our demo that we have a lot of different things going on here. So the first thing that we'll notice, we have that same kind of purple color coding that I did previously in our basics or classroom area. And these are going to be these regular approach kind of vectors where if someone walks into it, then they're going to be greeted by the shopkeeper as if they are a potential customer. This makes a lot of sense here as, someone who's approaching the stall to make a purchase is probably going to step in here. We don't really need to bounce around with our blacksmith. Then our blacksmiths have their own patrol regions kind of near their working areas. And they also have these little tiles here for doing some idle chatter. And each of these tiles is going to have the specific triggering token actually do the speaking here. We don't need to use Tagger for these ones because they are locked within the patrol area. If you did have a lot of other NPCs running around, you absolutely could link it to specific tags, which is what we have done on our kind of sales pitch greeting, where it's going to be blacksmith 2, and this particular blacksmith is our blacksmith number 2. So that's how we make these kind of immersive stalls similar to our demonstration and our basics area that we went over. And we're just combining the patrol with those entry points and the little idle pieces. And of course, over here, we actually have two different flavors of the kind of idle chit chat that's going on. We have both a more sales pitch oriented piece and also the idle chatter that we had previously in our dwarven forge here. So whenever these blacksmiths step on the kind of cyan colored tiles, they are going to be picking random lines that are kind of, taglines or catchphrases trying to attract passersby to come purchase their merchandise. And we just have two random tables for these different interactions. So within our role tables, we've got the idle for working and just kind of muttering to yourself, and then one for sales. These are just text. It's just coming up with things, and you don't even have to be that creative, and it really adds a lot. By having all these separate pieces and using Patrol, you randomize when these things are being said, and although they are ultimately picking from the same general basket, it is still going to feel kind of immersive that all of these different blacksmiths are having different things to say at different points in time. And then for our guard, we are using the path setup for patrol, and he's following this line here. And I have found when using paths that these 2 points are ideal. And as we move around close to the guard, he's going to say things like, go about your business, or I've got my eye on you, or citizen, etc. All kinds of curt sayings if you're getting a little too close to the guard. So that's set up like that attached piece that we went over in our classroom earlier. As I mentioned, I found that these 2 grid points are ideal for the pacing at the particular speed I have patrol at. So just tinker around to see what you would like. And important to know is if you have kind of this long path in one direction with patrol, that when they finish their patrol, they're going to go back to the beginning. So you'll notice I actually have a break point between my start and my end. So when the guard reaches this final point, he's going to wait a second, and then he'll move to the beginning and continue the route once more. You can set up as many of these as you would like. I have the text for guard path A. You could have B, C, D, whatever you want. And on our guard themselves, they are patrolling guard path A, and you could set up however many iterations of that you want. And that's going to conclude today's episode of Automating Foundry on NPC Chatter, making your world feel a bit more lived in using Monk's active tile triggers and the patrol module. Today we've obviously just discussed the applications of text and chat bubbles here, but you could apply this same logic for a whole variety of things, and you could really customize this a lot. You can add in a variety of different features that we've talked about in other episodes, such as having the guards get increasingly annoyed with different players the more they are invading that kind of personal space bubble of the guards, or you could, instead of using text and chat bubbles, you could instead have sounds play, such as the anvils ringing out as the smiths are working on them, or the whoosh of the bellows as the flames of the forges are being stoked, etc. There's a lot of really cool possibilities when you start to combine this idea of using patrol and having NPCs trigger tiles as they go about their days. So definitely let us know in the comments what you took away from this video. Are you going to be implementing this kind of as is to have some really cool immersive areas of your markets in your world? Are you going to kind of take this to another step or go in another direction by using the principles we talked about here to create another effect? And of course, let us know if you have any questions and what you'd like to see us cover next. So again, this has been Zephyr with the Bailey Wiki channel, and if you enjoyed this video, then subscribe to keep up with all of our latest content, and consider becoming a patron. Not only do you support the channel, we also gain access to all the modular systems and scenes that we've made for Foundry VTT, like this one. This was also a topic from a recent mastery coaching session that I did with one of our patrons. We have a whole mastery program on Foundry where you can sit down with me one-on-one, where we will go over everything from the absolute basics of Foundry VTT together to creating complex Monk's active tile trigger setups and a whole lot more. Our conversation kind of prompted me to really dive into this topic and inspired this video in its entirety. So if you're interested in sitting down with me and learning some of these techniques or discovering new possibilities with Foundry, then check out our mastery program on Patreon as well. Again, it's been Zephyr. Thank you so much for watching, happy gaming, and have a good one.